My grandmother's 80th birthday party was the kind of event that gets planned like a military operation. My aunt had reserved the private dining room at Hargrove House 6 months in advance. She'd flown in specialty flowers from a farm in Vermont, cream dahlias and pale blue hydrangeas, and had the centerpieces arranged by someone she described only as a woman I know from the junior league. The room smelled like fresh roses and money someone else had spent. There were 22 of us, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, my 3 cousins, my parents, various in-laws who had driven up our Richmond and Charlottesville, and a handful of family friends who had been attending Hargrove family gatherings long enough that nobody questioned their presence anymore. I was the second to last to arrive, not because of a delayed flight, because I'd sat in my rental car in the parking garage for 11 minutes, listening to traffic sounds, and doing the math on whether I actually needed to walk through that door. I'm Joss Hargrove, and in this family, that has always meant the one who left for Seattle, the one who does something with software that nobody asks about, the one who gets the warm smile and the vacant eyes when she tries to explain what she actually does for a living. There she is, my cousin said when I came in the tone people use when they spot someone they'd half forgotten was invited. My grandmother was the only one who crossed the room to hug me properly. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 in powder, the same as she had my entire life, and she held on a beat longer than everyone else did. You look wonderful, she said, and she meant it. That's the thing about her. She always meant it. I found my seat at the far end of the second table, between my cousin's husband, who spent most of dinner talking about a golf tournament he hadn't even played in, and an older woman named something like Phyllis, who kept refilling her own wine and ignoring everyone around her. I was used to the far end. I'd been sitting there since I was 12. The real conversation started when my uncle stood up. My uncle is the kind of man who has never once entered a room quietly. He's been running Hargrove Medical Supplies for 28 years, building it from a regional distributor into one of the largest privately held medical equipment companies on the East Coast. He talks about this the way some people talk about religion, with reverence and the implicit expectation that you share it. I have an announcement, he said, setting down his champagne flute with the deliberate weight of someone who has rehearsed this moment. Hargrove Medical just signed a letter of intent with Sycamore Health Systems. 7-state distribution expansion. Estimated contract value over 3 years. He paused for effect. $86 million. The table responded the way he wanted. My aunt pressed both hands to her collarbone. My cousins, his sons, looked at each other with the kind of pride that comes from proximity to something you didn't build. My father started clapping, which set off a wave of applause that rolled around the room. I sipped my water. The challenge, my uncle continued, settling back into his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had already solved the problem he was about to describe, is the capital required to scale the fulfillment infrastructure before the first payment comes in. We're looking at a bridge period, roughly 90 days. The number we need to carry operations is about 800,000. I set my glass down carefully. I could help with that, I said. The table went quiet, not thoughtful quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone accidentally says something in the wrong language at the wrong table. My aunt recovered first. She laughed, soft, controlled, the laugh she uses when she wants something to disappear without confrontation. That's so sweet, Joss. I'm serious, I said. What's the timeline on the bridge? Joss, my uncle's voice was careful, gentle in the way adults are gentle with children who've made an understandable but incorrect assumption. We're talking about a corporate financing structure. It involves bank covenants, receivables pledging, a personal guarantee from me. It's not. I know what a bridge facility is, I said. My cousin, the older one, the one who'd taken over the commercial division, reached for his bread roll. Look, it's not that we don't appreciate the offer. It's that 800,000 isn't something most people just have sitting around. And even if you did, commingling family relationships with corporate finance is genuinely complicated. Our attorneys would have a field day. My other cousin nodded. He's right. You'd be out of your depth before the term sheet even got drafted. No offense. I looked at my uncle. He looked at his plate. None taken, I said. I reached for my phone under the table and sent a text to my business partner, a woman named Audrey Park who had been with me since the second year, and who I was fairly certain had never once turned her phone off before 1 a.m. The text was 8 words. Pull the Hargrove position. All of it. Tonight. Dinner continued. My uncle talked about the Sycamore deal, the new distribution centers they'd be opening in Ohio and Georgia, the logistics software they were finally upgrading. My cousin talked about the sales team expansion. My other cousin talked about the regulatory certifications required for the new product lines. My aunt talked about the rebrand she was overseeing. New logo, new website, a whole visual identity refresh she'd apparently been planning for 2 years. They passed the breadbasket. They laughed at old stories. My grandmother smiled at the head of the table, and looked genuinely happy to have everyone in the same room. I ate my salmon and did not say much. I was good at that. At some point, my uncle mentioned their primary growth investor, a fund that had backed their last two major expansions. He described them the way people describe something they depend on but don't entirely understand. Reliable, discreet. The kind of money that doesn't need its name on anything. They've been with us 4 years, he said. Never once blinked. Every commitment, every disbursement, right on schedule. That's rare. You build a relationship like that and you protect it. My phone buzzed against my palm, confirmed. Position suspended as of tonight. They'll get the notice by 9 p.m., Audrey. I turned my phone face down on the table. They sound like good partners, I said. The best, my uncle agreed. Some people just know how to read a business and get out of the way. That's the whole art of it. He said it looking at my cousin when he said it, not at me. I picked up my water glass. My uncle's phone rang at 9:14 p.m. He was mid-sentence about the new Ohio warehouse footprint when he glanced at the screen and something shifted in his face. Not alarm, exactly, but change in register. He excused himself. Walked toward the corridor near the hostess stand. We could hear the low murmur of his voice but not the words. My aunt watched the corridor. My cousins exchanged a look. My grandmother kept cutting her birthday cake into smaller pieces, unbothered, the way someone is unbothered, when they've lived long enough to know that most crises resolve themselves. When my uncle came back, he looked like a man who had just been told the floor he'd been standing on was load-bearing for something he hadn't known existed. Meridian Capital, he said slowly. There's been a restructuring. They're suspending their position in our accounts. Silence. All of it? My cousin asked. All active positions. Immediately. What does that mean for the Sycamore Bridge? My other cousin's voice had gone flat and professional, the way it does when he's managing his own panic. It means we don't have one. My uncle sat down. He picked up his champagne flute and then put it down without drinking. The commitment letter was contingent on their capital position. If they're out, we call the bank tonight, my cousin said. Already reaching for his phone. Emergency line. It's Saturday, my aunt said. I know it's Saturday. The birthday dinner dissolved into something else. Phones out. Voices low. The kind of urgent murmuring that sounds like a different language when you're not inside it. The cream dahlias looked wrong against what the room had become. My grandmother watched her sons and grandsons with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not panic, something older and steadier than panic. My aunt looked at me across the table. Joss. She said my name carefully, like she was testing its weight. You work in what you do. It's investment adjacent, right? Tech investment? Something like that. Do you know anything about a fund called Meridian Capital? They're a private equity group, East Coast focus, very low profile. I looked at the tablecloth for a moment, then I looked up. I know a little about them, I said. Every conversation in the room stopped. What do you mean? My uncle asked. His voice was still. I've followed them for a while. They're structured through a series of holding companies, Delaware Shell, Wyoming LLC, a couple of offshore vehicles that make it hard to trace the actual ownership. Total assets under management are somewhere around 420 million. Real estate, healthcare infrastructure, some light manufacturing. Primarily mid-Atlantic and southeast markets. How do you know that? My cousin asked. Research. Nobody researches a private fund like that without a reason. He looked at me differently than he had all evening. What's your reason, Joss? I looked at my uncle. Check your email, I said. I just sent you something. He picked up his phone with the distracted movement of someone who didn't expect to find anything important. His eyes moved across the screen. Then they moved across it again. His jaw tightened in a way I'd only ever seen it tighten once before, when he got the call about my grandfather's first hospitalization. He lowered the phone to the table. Read it out loud, I said. Not unkindly. His voice came out smaller than usual. Meridian Capital Partners, principal ownership disclosure. He stopped. He cleared his throat. Controlling interest, 83%. He stopped again. I'll finish it, I said. Joss, controlling interest, 83%. Primary beneficial owner, Jocelyn A. Hargrove. Total assets under management, $422 million. The room did not make a sound. My grandmother set down her fork with a small, precise click. My cousin made a sound that wasn't a word. My other cousin pushed back from the table slightly, like he needed more space to process what he'd just heard. My aunt had both hands flat on the tablecloth, very still. My uncle looked at me the way I had never seen him look at anything, like a man watching a building he thought he knew reveal a different foundation. You're Meridian, he said. I've been Meridian for 4 years. 4 years and 3 months, Joss. He said my name like it had new syllables in it. How? I folded my hands on the table. I'd been holding this moment for a long time, not with anger, not really, not anymore. With something that had more weight than anger and less heat. A kind of patient grief for years of being looked past by people who loved me in every way, except the way that required them to actually look. When I left For Seattle at 25. I said. I had about $18,000 and an analytics platform I'd built in my apartment for 18 months. It was a healthcare data tool. It mapped supply chain inefficiencies for mid-size medical distributors. My uncle was very still. I sold the first licensing deal to a group out of Boston 14 months later. $700,000. I didn't spend it. I put it into a real estate fund I'd been watching. That paid out in 2 years. I rolled it into Meridian. I made mistakes. I made better decisions. I kept going. I looked at my uncle directly. You taught me, actually, not intentionally. You never sat me down and explained how you thought about capital allocation or risk timing, or what makes a distribution business scalable. You never thought to. But I was at every dinner, every holiday. I listened to you talk about your business for 20 years. I understood more than you knew. 400 million, my aunt said very quietly. 422. And you invested it in us. My cousin's voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. I invested it in a well-run business with strong fundamentals and a track record I could evaluate independently. The fact that the business belonged to my family was a factor. It was never the whole reason. Every dollar I put into Hargrove Medical was a calculated position based on your margins, your contract pipeline, your receivables quality. You run a good operation. I never doubted that. Then why? My other cousin started. He stopped. Started again. Why pull the position? Why tonight? I looked at him for a long moment. Because tonight, when I offered $800,000 to help close a bridge gap. A gap that, relative to my actual position, is the equivalent of someone handing you a $50 bill. You told me I'd be out of my depth before the term sheet was drafted. You said it wasn't something most people just have. Nobody spoke. I have been a part of this family's business for 4 years. Silently. Without credit. Without a seat at the table. Without anyone thinking to ask what I actually knew or what I had actually built. And tonight, at a birthday dinner in front of everyone, I offered to help, and I was patted on the head and told to stay in my lane. I kept my voice level. That was the thing I'd promised myself. That when this moment came, I would not raise my voice. I would not cry. I would not perform any emotion that could be dismissed. I've been invisible by choice, I said. I made that decision because I thought for a long time that if I was patient enough, you would see me on your own. I don't think that anymore. My uncle put his face in his hands. My grandmother, at the head of the table, had not moved. She was watching me with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression she'd had when I was 7 years old and had finally beaten my cousin at chess after losing to him for 3 years straight. Not surprise as recognition. My uncle lowered his hands. His eyes were red at the edges in a way I had never seen. Not even at my grandfather's funeral. Joss, he said. I owe you an apology that I don't have the words for yet. Tell me what specifically you're apologizing for, I said. Not cruelty, clarity, because I needed to know he understood it, not just that he felt bad. He was quiet for a moment. A long moment. For assuming, he said finally. For looking at you and seeing my niece who moved to Seattle instead of the person who was actually standing in front of me. I've been telling this company's story for 28 years, and it never once occurred to me that you might have one too. He exhaled slowly. That's a failure. That's mine. My older cousin spoke without waiting. I've been condescending to you since you were a kid. I did it tonight without even thinking about it. That's not something I'm proud of. He looked at the table. I'm sorry, Joss, that's real. My other cousin nodded slowly. Same, I'm sorry. My aunt reached across and put her hand over mine. She didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. You built something that belongs in a different category than anything I understood you to be capable of, and somehow, we made you feel like the only way to exist in this family was to keep it secret. That's not. We have to be different than that. I looked around the table, at people who loved me imperfectly and had failed me in a specific and correctable way. Here's what I want, I said. I'll reinstate the Meridian position. Full capital, full commitment, Sycamore Bridge proceeds on schedule, but I'm not staying invisible. I want a formal role in the strategic conversations, not as a silent backer, as a partner with a seat and a voice. I want to be consulted the way my cousins are consulted, not informed after decisions are already made, and I want this family to stop deciding what I understand before I've had a chance to speak. My uncle stood. He walked to my end of the table. He stood in front of me for a moment without speaking. You have always been the sharpest person in this family, he said. I just kept looking for that in the wrong places. He extended his hand. I shook it, then I texted Audrey, reinstate the Meridian position. Full capital reinstatement, plus an additional draw of $12 million for the Sycamore expansion infrastructure. I paused. Yes, I'm sure. Tell them happy birthday to my grandmother. I looked up at my family. The position will be restored by Monday morning, I said. The Sycamore deal is a good deal. I'd have backed it regardless. My uncle laughed, a real one, surprised out of him like something that had been held in too long. You would have? You built something worth backing, I said. I just needed you to know I was the one doing it. Later, when the cake had been cut, and the cousins had drifted into the lounge and the formal dinner had dissolved into the easier thing it becomes, after a long night, my grandmother found me by the tall windows that looked out over the garden, the lights from the dining room reflected against the glass. She came to stand beside me without announcing herself, the way she'd always moved through rooms, quietly, purposefully, without needing anyone to notice. She didn't say anything for a long moment. I knew, she said finally. I looked at her. Not the specifics, she said. Not the numbers. But I knew you were doing something real. You have that look, the one your grandfather had when he was building something. A kind of stillness. Like you're running something in your head all the time that nobody else can see. You never said anything. You never asked. She tilted her head slightly, and I thought you deserved to say it yourself when you were ready. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was held tight. I wasn't ready for a long time, I said. I know. She put her hand on my arm lightly. You are now. Outside, the garden was dark except the small landscape lights along the stone path. Inside, I could hear my uncle's voice, lower than usual, slower, talking to my cousin about something I couldn't make out. A different kind of conversation than they'd been having 3 hours ago. I didn't do it to hurt them, I said. I know that too. My grandmother looked out at the garden. You did it because you needed them to see you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's one of the most human things there is. I looked at her profile, 80 years old, still the clearest thinker in any room she walked into. Happy birthday, I said. She smiled. Small, genuine, the smile she saved for moments she actually meant. It turned out to be quite a good one, she said. The garden lights stayed on all night. Somewhere between the dessert course and the end of everything, I stopped being the person who sat at the far end of the table and started being something I didn't quite have a word for yet. Present, maybe. Visible in a way that was mine, not granted. I had built $400 million in the quiet years when no one was watching. It turned out the hardest thing I ever built was the nerve to let them see it.